Today we're gonna talk about almost all Forest attribute Aurorians. A lot of you guys wanted to see another tier list video from me, so once again, here we are, with the already second out of in total 4 videos. And like you already know from the intro, this time we're looking at the forest element. But before we can begin, I, like last time, do have to give some disclaimers. The first and most obvious thing is, of course this list is going to be based on mostly my personal opinion and experience, meaning it's very likely to be biased, so if you disagree with any of my rating decisions, that's completely fine. And I would appreciate if you could share your thoughts with me in the comments down below. I'm also not going to take any breakthroughs of 5 and 6 stars into account, which also leads me directly to my third point. This list is also only going to cover through gacha obtainable Aurorians, meaning welfares and also the legendary Aurorians are out of the picture. Why? Because these don't need you to spend your precious Lumember and also have way easier access to breakthroughs. Especially the 4 characters that are obtainable from the old seal do need to be talked about in much more detail and also with their BTs in mind, which is a video that I'm already working on right now. So expect that soon TM. And there's actually 2 more things that I have to mention. 1. I'm like last time going to split all characters we're talking about into 2 categories: DPS and supporting Aurorians. 2. I'm trying to evaluate all these Aurorians depending on how they perform in these 3 different types of gameplay. Hard content, like Elysium, Spire and Co. Burst heavy content, which would be CC and generally just most boss fights. And of course also general content, which is pretty much everything else. If someone is excelling in one specific type, I am also going to mention that. Otherwise, if you want to know how they perform in one specific type of gameplay, there's a rough estimation in this rectangle in the corner. So, now that all of this is out of the way, let's get right into it, by first talking about characters that are underwhelming. These are Aurorians that are simply beyond saving. And like last time, there's barely anyone here, as the only occupant is Yomu. He's a 3-star focused on damage, aka he just doesn't do anything. Next up, average. Like the name suggests, these are Aurorians that are sadly only average at best, as there are just way stronger options available. Let's start with our damage dealers that are occupying this tier, which should be singular, as there's only one, Silva. And he does have a fairly plain design, and his kit is pretty much the same, because he's an OK DPS with a OK cross-chain and an OK equip that can give him and also your team a little bit of death-ignoring damage. And I know, all of that doesn't sound too appealing, but at least he does have an interesting yet very limited teleport that kind of justifies him being here, as some utility is always nice to have on an DPS. Speaking of utility, let's move over to the supporting Aurorians. And our first candidate is Clover from Naruto. While she's technically a detonator, with her being a 3-star, her damage is sadly nothing to be proud of. So you might be wondering why she's even here then. Well, she's pretty much a weird poison support, as her active is basically a cross-converter 1 without the converter part, and instead with the ability to double poison stacks on hit targets. And poison is the best dot in the game, so it is actually not too bad. While she's not going to provide that many stacks by herself, as her only source is her equipment, she does offer a somewhat useful option to dedicated poison teams. Next is Leah, who is only here because of her funny active skill. This is just perfect to completely bamboozle Umbra Hulk and Co, as you can just bonk them real good and at the end of the round use the secret technique of the Joestar family. And that's pretty much it. Very gimmicky, but hey, it can probably be somewhat handy. And for last we have Bethlehem's secret weapon, the intimidating, the scary, the monstrous Ophina. And she's not here to play around, as she will pull a reverse card on you, swapping the elements of 2 tiles on the map, which is a pretty gimmicky and also really roundabout way of getting a green tile. But hey, if you're really desperate for converters, if it works, it works. And before we move on, look out for Athena. She might seem like the usual cute girl, but behind that smile is an evil mastermind that might take you out. No, not in that sense. With poison. Which is made apparent by her equipment. So the next time you play a card game with her, just let her win if you're fond of being alive. Now that we're done with all the average Joes, let's move on to Solid. This describes Aurorians that are not perfect, but just all around pretty solid picks in a lot of scenarios. Like before, let's begin with a damage dealer, Cuscuta. And yes, if you watched this RR review, you already know that I actually bumped her up to solid, as she is in fact a lot better than all previously mentioned DPS, so I can't really leave her hanging in average. And this change definitely doesn't have anything to do with a certain someone threatening anyone. Nope, totally just did that out of my own free will. But my opinion in general on her didn't really change, because she's still a limited range sniper who's only really being useful if you fight off against a single tile enemy that can be moved with her active skill. If that's not the case, she's more of a trophy. Nice to look at, but not really. Let's switch to our next patient, who is already our last DPS for now. Lester. And yes, Lester is female, which I didn't know for a long time, as I never really thought about leveling her up, but obviously that changed. And now I know that this stinker, yes, that's really the name of the skill, is actually not that bad, as she's also a poison-based Aurorian. But she takes things a lot more relaxed compared to her colleagues. She just places down some deadly mines, and as you can thankfully not smell, the stank action doesn't actually stop here, because her equip and also chains do provide you with some more poison, making her generally a good choice to cheese hard content. And now, it's once again time to switch to our supporting Aurorians. And we're going to start this off with the infamous Rainbow Resetter, Jola. His only reason to exist is to reset the whole field to get rid of these pesky locked and broken tiles, and maybe trim your garden? Our next choice, however, would probably rather sleep than help you with anything. Let me present you another part of the small bird gang, Dove. And yes, this is another of my based takes. And once again, yes, I'm going to explain why she's here right now. But before that, I do have to ask you a question. Are you familiar with a certain researcher? Green hair? Her name starts with M and ends with Guard? No? Okay, fine. I'm just going to say it outright instead of taking the long way. If I wanted Megard, but Turdok would say, we already have Megard at home, they would probably show me a picture of Dove, because that's what she basically is. Boneless Megard. Her active skill is just a carbon copy of hers, but obviously Dove has way easier access to preemptive strike. And of course, Dove can't even come close to the damage our Green Devil with a big heart can provide. But we're in the forest element here, so oftentimes you already have more than enough damage at your disposal, making Megard at home at least a decent budget TP option. And while we're already talking about teleporters, let's get to our last solid Aurorian, Wendy, who's, like I just told you, another teleporter. But this time around, things are a little more interesting. While her active does have a slightly higher CD with 3, she makes up for it by getting a 3 random TP at the start of the battle. How does that work? Well, Wendy's active uses favors that you actually have to place down first before you can TP to them. But you can do that at any time you wish for. And you do get a random favor on the field, one time only, as a special offer from the Courier Union. But don't buy into their schemes. I heard you gain a lot more by just subscribing to the SyNo YouTube channel, so I would suggest you to do that. And maybe also to think about using Wendy, as she can do better damage compared to Dove, and her TP is of course global and stat, making her probably an overall superior choice. Speaking of superior choices, let's now look at all characters that are strong. These are top tier characters, or at least somewhat close to it, that are often some of the best choices in most scenarios. You already know the drill by now. Our first DPS is someone you probably saw on my channel not too long ago. Yes, that's right, Pompeii. Okay, yes, Hades of course also there. And because I already made a 12-minute video on my thoughts about her, watch it if you haven't already by the way, I'm going to keep this rather short. But one thing about Hades that's never going to be short is Pompeii, which is also the best part about her, as he does give her a whole lot of damage. And there's of course also her active skill, that she just stole from Carleen without even asking. Rude. And yeah, while converting a whole column and TPing at the same time is pretty handy and compact, sadly Hades often doesn't really have a space in most forest teams, but if you can find a spot for her, she is going to serve you quite well, by dealing a lot of damage, sometimes converting some tiles, and of course by suing you for harassment. Next is the girl you probably shouldn't give a crystal to for Valentine's Day, Beryl. Her main role is to provide you with a lot of crystals that are going to drive all of your foes insane. And she can do that thanks to her equipment that spawns death-ignoring crystals in her chain combo range that also get increased damage by using 10 plus chains. And after some donations from an unknown Beryl supporter with a fedora, you can actually now also stack multiple crystals on top of each other by triggering Aurora Time or using her active skill, resulting in really big possible damage. Speaking of big, Paloma. Paloma is the best global sniper of the forest element, for multiple reasons. At least two big ones to be exact. Which of course are her global sniper chain in combination with her equip boosting it, and her detonator-like active skill that shoots out a massive line that spreads out in a 3-tile cross shape when it hits enemies, increasing its damage even further with each tile it traverses, possibly wiping the whole field and resulting in, once again, really big damage. And once again, speaking of really big, Migard. And yes, I'm going to make the same joke a third time. She's not only Illumina's #1 perv researcher, lusting after most girl knowledge on your Colossus, but she's also the teleporter I mentioned while talking about Dove, this time the real deal. And she's a pretty big addition to your roster, as she does have pretty big stats. And Migard also takes advantage of those by executing eclipse sites left and right with the help of her equipment. But of course, the main reason to use her is Amber's active skill, which is a really handy 2-turn CD teleport, and that's basically the cherry on top, making her a truly deadly asset to your team. And you know what else is deadly? Poison. Don't drink it, it's not good for you. But for really hard to get rid of opponents, it's probably the best medicine to use, if you want to quickly dispose of them. And the best choice to do exactly that is our next and last strong DPS, OD. While she's of course a support on paper, it's actually very fitting, as her main role is to support you in killing terrifying foes, and help you get better at rhythm games, I guess. How does she do that? The getting rid of enemies part, I mean. Well, of course by using poison, and more poison, as her active is an AoE skill that poisons, her equip lets her attack diagonal, and all these normal attacks poison, and her chain is a column chain that's right, burns. Okay, fine, it poisons. Which not only makes OD the best poison applier in the game, but also in result the queen of hard content. Because just throwing some green stuff at your foes and running away, watching them slowly die while you eat some chips and mind your day, is a lot easier than struggling doing it the normal way. So if you want to do hard content like Elysium, Forest Spire and co, here's 2 secret tips. Do not share. These are only for you. Step 1. Put a E10 A3 OD in your team. Step 2. Listen carefully. I'm not going to repeat this. Profit. And if you want to know how to profit even more, follow me, because we're now going to move over to the supporting Aurorians. And our first one is the best friend of the last Aurorian we just talked about, Pasolo. She's not only your simple one-tile select converter, but also part of the Big 5 when it comes to hard endgame content, as she does provide another dot in addition to her conversion, Bleed. While it's obviously not as good as Poison, it's the best supplement to it, and that's already everything you pretty much need to know about her. For general content she's fine because she's still a converter, but endgame content is where she truly shines, alongside for example OD. Our next victim is, well, probably awake. I'm not too sure as she doesn't really open her eyes. Gabriel. She is technically a resetter, but Gabs is a really special case, as she basically is the Thanos of Alchemy Stars. You want to get rid of one element in the game? Fire? Sure. With one activation of her active skill, you won't see any fire tiles, at least for a while. And yes, that's not always too handy outside of the usual resetter scenarios, but it does make her a pretty useful addition to rainbow teams, or even in other elements. And that combined with her ability to generate some enhanced tiles as well, which a lot of characters do make use of, justifies her being here. Just make sure to not anger her, otherwise not the tiles, but you are going to get Thanos snapped. So better get away. Where could you hide? In a forest maybe? Oh, a deer. Why does it have a blindfold? Oh, well if it isn't our next candidate. Naroxel. She does not only sound like a medicine, she also is one, as she can actually cleanse tiles with her global 3-turn teleport, and this TP is pretty handy. If you want a teleporter with detonator-like chains for maybe a burst team, want to get rid of debuff tiles, or just want to take a stroll through some wildlife, fresh air is pretty nice after all. Naroxel and her slave are a pretty good choice. But if you're looking for a more holy Aurorian, Uriah is probably your best bet. She is after all the healer of Alchemy Stars. Everything about her is related to healing. Just look at her forehead tattoo. True dedication. And this dedication also pays off for you, as her active skill Heal, that already only has a 1-turn cooldown, resets its cooldown whenever you enter Aurora time, giving you great synergy in teams that run a lot of converters. And speaking of synergy, she also can generate some enhanced tiles for our Lord and Savior. And while I'm already mentioning a Savior, we should probably save this little girl before something bad happens to her while she's visiting her grandma. Her name? Louise. Her occupation? Double chain support. Do I need to say more? Fine. Louise is just like all of her double chain colleagues, not you, mostly used for bursting and OTK teams, as she does allow you to trigger chain combos twice one time. And that's pretty much everything she offers if you ignore the small heal you can get by triggering Aurora time, or her detonator-like chains, or this lantern, called Sikara. She's the usual cross-converter, so she also has the usual strengths, like converting a lot of tiles, and also the usual weaknesses, aka a super long 5-turn cooldown, and her constantly calling you a simp. Well, for some that might actually be a pro. I don't judge. Besides that, she does have death ignoring damage and global sniper chains, which is not too bad. And before I forget, here are once again Heidi and her favorite butler, as they are technically converters. But we already talked enough about her, so let's move on. Our last strong supporting Aurorian is actually a quite familiar face. Megard. Let's quickly go on, because our journey is almost over. But we do still have to look at the forest element's cream of the crop. So, let's check out our final rating tier. Core. Characters that are, like the name already hints at, core in almost every team, as they are just way too overpowered, and achieve things that other Aurorians can't reproduce with the same efficiency and or power. First is my second most favorite Aurorian in the game, and probably also one of the strongest ones in general. Of course, I'm talking about Hero. She is just way too strong. Being the mix of a detonator and a 2-selectile converter is just plain unfair and way too powerful. Who on earth are her parents to create something like this? No, surely not these two. That could work. Anyway, Hero's true power comes from the big AoE damage her equip allows her to do with the help of this equipment that triggers at the start of every round, or also by stepping on enhanced tiles, which definitely makes up for her slightly lower stats. And of course, Hero's active skill does not only deal damage in a cross shape, but also converts the 2 chosen tiles to green enhanced ones. And she has pink hair, some katanas, 2 dragons. What else do you want? She's basically perfect. And well, while we're at the topic of perfect Aurorians, let's talk about the possibly craziest DPS in the game, Area. Thanks to the active skill that for 1 turn increases her attack by activating her magic sword, you're a wizardary. And her equipment that enhances this even further by allowing her to pierce enemies with her normal attacks with a 100% scaling. She's truly a force to be reckoned with. But you can't ignore that she has a small downside, as she does reduce her own attack and death by 50% for 1 turn after the usage of this skill. However, you can actually prevent this. How? Just finish off an enemy while wielding her magical sword. She does have to do the last hit though. And there's still one important thing that I still have to mention. Just don't ignore that do not touch sign while using her. There's all these thorns after all. You don't want to... well, I guess who could resist? Finishing this whole thing up by once again talking about the second best girl in Alchemy Stars, Hero. After all, she can also just take on the role of a dedicated converter and sub DPS. I guess she's not the original beater for nothing. And, of course, last but not least, the 2 most obvious core Aurorians are Nickiness and Pact. I don't think I have to say much. 4-tile converters in general are just really good, no RNG, a good amount of converted tiles, low cooldowns and also preemptive strike for completely free. Besides that, these 2 don't offer anything amazing. Nicki Minaj does have some pretty good synergy with Uriah that can make you a true tank, and Pact has her looks. Just look at that inviting skin. Pretending, huh? Well, I'm gonna pretend that all of you didn't have any unpure thoughts while looking at this, and show you the full list. Did this list help you? Because I sure hope it did. But don't forget to take everything you just heard with a grain of salt. And if you disagree with anything or just have something to share, just comment down below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. That was all from me, have a nice day and see you next time.